Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
It's the first time I'm wearing heels in a while. Thanks for the remote work, John. Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us on this beautiful Saturday morning. Wow, you guys are committed. We appreciate you. Thank you so much. And we did have about 62 registered for this event, and some will be coming in for certain events. But the way this works is you will have your keynotes here, your opening and your closing keynotes here, as well as the improv troupe at the end. And then you also have power skills. So if you choose the power skills track, this is where you'll be. If you choose ways of working, that will be in room 123, which is on the left. And business acumen is 124 on the right. We'll have breaks in between, 10 minutes, depending on how long we go. Hopefully we'll gonna try to be good project managers and stay on track. So we will have lunch served, and we have, at the end of the event, we'll have, as I said, improv and a happy hour with wine, beer, and mocktails for those who, it might be a little early for some people anyway.
It's never
Right?
too early, right? Especially on a Saturday.
Right. So again, I want to thank you. There's so many friends of PMI Carolina here that always, you ask them and they're like, yes. Stacy Cassio is one of them. Thank you, Stacy. And then we have two people I work with, John and Grandin. Well, John's my boss, so not really work with. So they're here as well, representing Syncora. And we have a lot of great volunteers, return volunteers, and just really looking forward to a good day. We're going to kick you off with Taiwo Jaiyoeba. And I also, Stacy, saw him in 2018 in Charlotte as Creative, and you just blew my mind. And when I thought of a keynote for this, I did not think of anybody else but you. I tried to get other people because you went to Greensboro. So, but I'm like, yeah, I just need to get him. And he was so delightful, and on LinkedIn he said yes without much more information. So thank you, sir. And then we have 9 great, amazing breakout session speakers who are thought leaders in their industry, leaders in their organization, and highly skilled practitioners. So you will get a lot of expertise, and all of these are case studies. This is something that they have done, they have learned from, and they're sharing that with you. So then we have our closing keynote, which we're kind of switching gears and doing something a little more humorous. So we have Lauren Ansley from Ansley Entertainment, and she's going to give us a humorous take on resiliency. And then finally, fun. Yes. Fun and drink. And I just quickly want to invite the volunteers for PDD to please come up or stand up, whichever you prefer to do, in your ways of working. Thank you, Keisha. So,
There's some right there, and there's also
and
some
outside, and some in the back.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so we started this journey in April, and we really ramped up in May, and it's been a whirlwind. So we're very excited for the day, and we're happy to have you here. So I want to introduce you to our VP of Professional Development, Neelan Lewis, and he'll say a few words.
Yeah. Hey, good morning, everyone. I am Neelan Lewis II. I am from Charlotte, North Carolina, by way of Buffalo, New York. I don't know if anyone saw Monday Night Football. I'm still kind of getting over that, but anyway, New York won, even though they really play New Jersey. Really happy to have you all here. If any of you have been with PMI Carolina for a while, you know that I serve as VP of Professional Development, and Professional Development Day is our hallmark event that we have every year. This is our first one in person, so give yourselves a pat on the back that you're actually here in person. You know, we'll never get away from hybrid, so, you know, we still have the options where these are being recorded and available for our members to view on demand, and there are a lot of people who did purchase those options as well, but we want to make sure that we get back to being in person and collaborating. as well. So thank you so much for coming out. Just want to point something else out. On the slides, there'll be additional information at the end about a survey. And that's how you actually, if you take the survey, that's how you actually can get your PDUs claimed. If you don't do it, then you can claim them yourself. And then one other housekeeping, parking. So if you parked in the Wake Forest University Center City lot, make sure you have your ticket with you, and we'll give you a sticker at the end if you haven't gotten it already. All right, so for our keynote, he's a bashful man. He doesn't necessarily want a big intro, but many of you know about Taiwo Jaiyoeba. He used to work with the city of Charlotte as assistant city manager and was also the director of planning, and he has gone on to Greensboro. So a sister city, not too far, up 85. We are so grateful to have him here. He's going to be talking about how to frame city planning for the future, and you're really in for a treat. So Rhonda and I are going to move out the way so you can get the most of his time and the value. And Taiwo, thank you for coming.
You. Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I forgot to ask, will there be opportunity for questions and answers at the end? Would you mind? Maybe one or two questions? Okay, all right. Let's see how you do this. Okay, well, I hate that. Okay, well, good morning again. So I'd like to, first of all, say thank you to Rhonda for inviting me. I appreciate the opportunity. I know we started talking, and when she said September 16, I said, okay, let me check. I will be going on vacation. And so I found out that I will be able to make it back in time. So I was in Dubai for 10 wonderful days. No tie, I did not shave. Of course, all flip-flops. There's nothing like this. Shorts, it was 108 degrees and humid, but it was fun. I didn't want to come back. But I thought about this and I thought, you know what, I should honor my commitment. I should come back. So thank you very much for having us. And I have one of my colleagues with us this morning who actually could be doing some other wonderful things on Saturday mornings, but she chose to come with me. So Latoya Sister Crawford used to work here in Mecklenburg County with the school system and also with Iredell. And then she started to work for Guilford County Schools. And when I got to Greensboro, I found that we didn't have anyone to manage our government affairs relations. Every city needs someone who is a point person on legislative issues and connecting with advocacy. And education is very important to me. And I felt that there's no better person to do that than someone who is an educator, but also understands how democratic principles work, especially when it comes to leveling the playing field for people who live in our cities. It took me about a year to finally convince her to join us as the city of Greensboro as a manager of intergovernmental relations. I'm always looking for good people, just saying. So, so once again, I'm happy to be here. I've actually titled this Framing the Future of Cities because this is at the core of what PMI does. And I will talk a little bit more about that because you as an organization and also as individuals, you have a role to play in determining the destinies of our future, of our cities. As our cities grow, and I will share some data with us as how we're growing and developing, you have a major role to play in that. And while professionals and administrators like us have a huge say in the process, but the fact of the matter to me is that more than us are people who define the trajectory of cities. Now, the interesting thing to me, I always say that I do not want our city to become like any other city. I don't want any city that I have the privilege of leading to be anywhere USA. I want any city that I have a hand in helping to lead to be uniquely Greensboro or uniquely Charlotte. There's something about that. And the only way cities can be unique is if they grow with the identities of the people who live in those cities and they reflect the voices of the people who plan projects, who scope projects, who shape those cities. The interesting thing is that it's not in the hands of elected officials. We just make them think it's in their hands. It's really in the hands of the people who live and do business in those cities. And you do business in a lot of cities. You transact businesses. People who live, work, play, learn in cities should be defining the identities of cities. And when we do, we have a city that really is different. I do not like to go to a city and feel that the downtown is too familiar, because I just came from another city that looks that way. And so every city should have its own unique identity. So your organization, of course, has a role to play in that. But before I talk a little bit about the rest of it, let me talk a little about myself, okay? And then I'll talk a little bit about the important role that you play as an organization in our state. So I was born and raised in Nigeria. Some of you who are familiar with the map of the world and Africa should be able to identify Nigeria somewhere there on the coast of West Africa. But I went to school in Nigeria. I did my master's in planning and in geography, but I never grew up thinking that I would be a city planner or even a city manager. No, I grew up thinking I just wanted to do something that gives me joy. I wanted to have fun. I was a playful kid. I was never necessarily great in school, but I was playful. And I wanted a job that allows me to have fun. And so I always think that fun was more important to me, and I had fun working as your city's planning director, regardless of what anyone tells you. I actually had fun sticking it to people sometimes. But it was a joyful thing for me just to be able to come into the office and say, how can we make people's life wonderful today? And I also have fun working as a city manager. Are there dysfunctional days? Absolutely. There are always dysfunctional days, but I try to focus on the fun in the dysfunction. And I just feel that if you're not having fun, if you're not joyful in what you do, what's the point of doing it? That's what you're going to do for most of your day, so you better enjoy. So why I always had a good sense of places and spaces when I was growing up, it was really my dad that motivated me to pursue a career in planning. And we fought over this, and I still remember that drive when I told my dad, I don't want to do this. And he said, well, son, it's too late. I paid already, and I remember saying, well, I'm going to do it for you. And my dad put his hand on my shoulder and said, son, do it for me. I'll frame the diploma and put it in my office. But thank you for doing that. And so I spent 2 years studying urban planning. Initially, I thought it was going to be boring experience, and I was really reluctant to embrace it. But to my surprise, in the first planning class, the professor quoted William Shakespeare, "What is the city but the people?" For some reason, that was what grabbed my attention, because as a young kid, I grew up in a university town. And I had cousins and uncles who lived in Lagos, which was Lagos is now roughly about 20 million people. At that time, it was probably about 8 million people. I thought cities were about things, buildings, and things that move around. I never thought about the fact that cities were really about people. And so that grabbed my attention, because anything that had people at the center of it and how you can influence how they do business in the city space grabbed my attention. And so I felt it was important for me then to start thinking about making a career out of it. It definitely sparked my interest, because I felt that cities are first and foremost about the people who live in them, and therefore you design the cities for them. So I worked as a planner in Nigeria briefly, then I went to Botswana in Southern Africa. Right after President Mandela was released from prison, I was in Botswana, and I had a hand in designing a few towns from scratch. I thought that, that's a really great opportunity to just have a clean slate and be given the opportunity to design towns from scratch. And so you can design where pedestrians will walk, where the recycling, the water treatment plant will be, and it was just an ideal thing. But it wasn't always like that. So I started by working with a Swedish planning firm in Botswana, which was really helping to design cities and towns on a pro bono basis for South African towns because of the apartheid. Even though the Mandela had been released in 1994, I was still vestiges of apartheid. I mean, come on, I was still in South Africa in 2018, and you still see these vestiges of apartheid are still there even many years later. So we would design towns, And the whole idea behind it was to create equitable cities for people. And so we designed entire towns, transportation systems, and then I moved to the United States in 1996. Worked in Sacramento, worked in Grand Rapids, Atlanta, Charlotte, and of course now Greensboro. And people often ask me, why did you make the transition from being city planner to city manager? I'm always tempted to say there's more money as city manager, but I usually won't say that. I will always say what I think is the right thing, which is always that city managers, planners make the best city managers. No offense, no, because planners connect the dots. Planners have these egos or bird's eye view of how everything in an environment connects, whether it's how people drive or how they use parks and trails or where people ride their bicycle. All of those things that you often don't notice when you're driving, planners notice them because for the most part, we have this view of how everything should connect and shape people, which means if you get it right, it's a good thing. If you get it wrong, you can make people's lives miserable in the urban space. But I felt that no matter how wonderful a planner's job is, a city manager has the opportunity of a vantage point because a planner can only propose ideas. A city manager actually has some funding mechanism behind them to make these things come to life. You do projects, so you understand what I mean. I mean, for you as PMI, turning ideas into reality is really what's very important. And I believe that a city manager plays in that space. He doesn't manage projects, he doesn't lead programs, but he leads a group of people to be able to connect, whether it's public safety or dealing with homelessness or wondering about whether some of those dots in the community can connect. A city manager, I felt, does that. So while a planner's job is to organize places, connect people to those places in the most efficient way possible, a manager's job is to oversee how these services on a day-by-day basis are provided in an efficient manner to those who live, work, play, and learn in those places. These services include what you see there on the screen, whether they be clean water or safety or safe streets or recreational amenities, among others. So there's never enough money to realize a planner's dream. There's never enough money to realize projects either, but the manager works with elected officials to set priorities and then tries to channel funds in meeting those priorities. The manager is a bridge builder, a maker of compromises. I call myself a magician because I go back into that room, mix this potion that's infected or influenced by various people, come out at the end of the day and show the elected officials, and they can vote it down or vote it up. There's never a neutral ground. But I love that. I love being able to be the person in the arena who is making a strong case for what I believe is right for cities. A planning director in Greensboro seems to think that I'm the best thing ever because I have a planning background. But at the same time, I have to also be able to say planning is great, but planning is useless if it doesn't connect with all of these other things in the space that we live in. And in my mind, PMI plays a major role in that. You have operate in about 61 counties. You have a huge swath of land, really that includes some of the fastest growing cities in our state, right? Whether they go from Asheville to Wilmington or Charlotte or Greensboro, you have a major role to play in how cities are shaped and how some of these services are provided, because you could manage a project in a good way and you could manage a project in a wrong way. Now, our cities are growing. I don't think I need to tell you that our cities are growing. And there's nothing wrong with growth. In fact, one of the things that you quickly realize in this next slide is this. You'll notice that most of the growth, everything you see in green, is in the southeast. And Charlotte, Greensboro, the triad, I should say, Raleigh, are playing a major role in that space. Now look at this. If you can't see what I highlighted there, just think about that for a minute. In the last 22 years, Charlotte has grown 107%. That's huge, which means a child that was born about 22 years ago, when they turned 5 or 6 or 7 in Charlotte, and if you take them somewhere else and bring them back, they won't recognize this city. if you've lived in Charlotte for a long time, you probably may not even realize that because your focus has been on uptown. But Charlotte isn't only growing uptown, it's actually growing everywhere. And so that's why people, when I worked here, we used to say, and I think that number has gone up, that 51% of people who commute to Mecklenburg County every single day for work come from outside Mecklenburg County. They come from Fort Mill, they come from York, they come from Cabarrus County, they come from places, Gaston. I think that number has gone up. And people often try to compare Charlotte with Atlanta, and I often say that there's really not a whole lot of comparison, frankly speaking, except maybe for the traffic that gets worse in Charlotte every time now these days. But I'll tell you the reason there's no difference. Charlotte, there's not a whole lot of similarities, rather. Charlotte is bigger than Atlanta as a city, because Atlanta as a city is not even 500,000 people. Charlotte as a city is almost 900,000 people. Atlanta during the day gets most of its population from people who live in Cobb and Gwinnett, and roughly about 6 million people live in the Atlanta metropolis. A lot of them come to Atlanta to work during the day, but Atlanta as a city is not that big. Charlotte as a city, most of your 900,000 people who live in this city, who work in this city, actually live in this city. That's why traffic has the potential to be worse in Charlotte than in Atlanta, because at least in Atlanta, most of those people are driving in from Marietta, from Duluth, from South Atlanta, and then they go back home at night. In Charlotte, you're stuck with them. They are here not just between 8 and 5, they also do life here after 5. That's why when the mayor said to me some years back and said, my goal is to actually, I want to run on mobility, and asked me to champion the transformation and mobility network, the goal behind it was to say that you can't just come into Charlotte through one way. We've got to design our roads in such smart ways, but you also have to improve the light rail system. And frankly speaking, 80% of people who use transit in Charlotte use buses, not the trains. And so if you're going to really make people's lives better mobility-wise, you've got to invest more in buses and make it comfortable for people who feel comfortable using the bus than the train. Make it safer, make it cleaner, make sure that people can connect to Wi-Fi while they're on it, and make sure that it goes where people want to go, and make sure that you minimize transfers. Again, because 107% growth is very unusual over a 2-decade period. This city has not stopped growing either, and it continues to do that. But you live here, you see it every day. And that's kind of, and then I've talked about this, I've talked about the fact that you have a huge role to play here. But when you think about that, this is what North Carolinians actually think about about growth in North Carolina. When you look at it, contrary to what you might have heard, according to the North Carolina League of Municipalities, the most recent survey shows that most North Carolinians want to see growth and development, period. Now, you're going to hear from a lot of people, we call them not in my backyard, the NIMBY people. Okay, that sounds like a very nice word. I have another word for it. It's called citizens against virtually everything, the cave people. Because the cave people, they don't want anything. If you say, let's build tall, no. Let's build short, no. Let's build slim, no. Let's build big, no. I mean, they just want nothing. They want everything to remain the way it was in 1950. But we know we can't. When we were working on the Charlotte Future Comprehensive Plan, I was always saying to people, we're planning for the next 20 years, for the next 40 years, not the last 20. And yet there are people who want us to go back there. And so there's no way you can so contrary to what we hear, 77% of North Carolinians actually agree that we should encourage growth and development, because it's a measure of progress. It's a measure that you're increasing your tax base. It means that you're actually having diversity in your city. It also means that the likelihood is that you're creating more jobs. The more your cities expand, the more your communities expand, the more people want to be there, because equity is good business. If you live in an environment where everybody looks like you, you're not going to enjoy it for long. Growing cities have the potential to have diversity. Growing cities have the potential to have inclusivity. Growing cities have the potential. I was in Dubai for 10 days, and each one of those days, I did not go to McDonald's. I went to an Iranian restaurant, a Pakistani restaurant, an Indian restaurant. I wanted to try everything that was out there, even though I paid for it. You know. But that's what a growing city does, and a growing city should do. Most North Carolinians actually want that. And as a city planner and a manager, I'm excited that 77% of those who responded to this survey believe that city or county government should have more control over policies that determine how growth should proceed. It means when we hire the right professionals or the right managers and we elect the right officials who understand the importance of smart growth, sustainable growth, equitable growth, that we can actually have a city that's on the cutting edge of everything. This is very important. Why? Because your urban space is where you're going to do life for the most part of your weekdays. If you spend 1 hour driving to Charlotte from wherever you live every day, you want to make sure that the time you spend here is worth everything before you go back home. You want it to be planned well. You want it to be designed in such a way as to attract people of all walks, generate revenue, sustain business, give people access to means of mobility, and of course, make sure that you keep them safe. If people are leaving your city, they are sending a message to your city's leadership. They're sending a message that your city should grow and develop. If your city is not growing and developed, then it is dying. And nobody stays in dying cities, especially young people. They move. So how then should we grow? What are the things we consider as we frame growing into the future? When we were working on the Charlotte Future Comprehensive Plan, it's a great plan. Charlotte had not had a plan since 1975 that was like this. All the other plans, there was a plan that was developed back in 1985, but that was the beginning of the problem. That plan that was developed in 1975 was a citywide plan. The plan that was developed in 1985 broke the city into 5 geographies: North, South, East, West, and Central. And that's why you have West Charlotte remain the way it was, because it could not update its plans quickly enough compared to plans in South Charlotte. Because to update a community plan will take easily 15 to 18 months. But the voices that were louder at the table got their own plans updated quickly. And the voices that were not even invited to the party at all had their plans. I mean, I walked into a department that had plans that had been there since 1971 and had not been updated. And guess where those plans were from? Mostly West Charlotte. I would drive, as I lived in Union County. Again, you have to understand this. Because when I came to Charlotte, I was a consultant. So I didn't choose just to live in Union County. And I never had an office. So my main office was my house and the airport, okay, because I was going everywhere. And so when I became planning director, that's where I stayed, because I didn't want to move because, disrupt my kids' education. But I did an experiment when I became a planning director. I would drive from South Charlotte at night and drive towards West Charlotte. And the further west I went, the darker the streets became. And so I felt something needed to be done. The city was in the middle of modernizing its regulations then. Those regulations were in about 7 or 8 different documents that were difficult. To take an attorney to understand them. Even as a planner, I could not understand some of these things. There were discrepancies in there, because understand the reason why people hire lawyers to go to council meetings. Because they could interpret those regulations to suit themselves better. So we were trying to create transparency, bring all these documents together, make sure that they speak to one another. But in the process, we forgot something that was critical. People don't like to live their lives by rules. People want cities to be shaped by vision. So I said, let's put a pause on the regulation. Let's start with a plan process. Let's get the people to tell us what kind of future they want, what kind of Charlotte they want for themselves. So we started with what I call an equity atlas. We looked at all the policies that drove the city. We looked at the reason why schools were performing well in certain places and schools were not performing well in certain places. We found out, interestingly enough, that the most traffic you're going to get, of course, that will not be a surprise to you, was uptown Charlotte. That's where you got the most traffic. The second area where you got the highest volume of traffic was in South Charlotte. Why? Because it has the second highest concentration of jobs. And so most people, if they were not uptown, they wanted to go to South Charlotte. That's why if you live in South Park, you complain every single day that there's traffic. And so we wanted to say, how do you balance that so that if people don't go uptown to work, they don't necessarily have to go to South Charlotte to work. There should be jobs in other parts of the city too. And I realized that I would drive miles sometimes and I would not find a full-service bank or a full-service grocery store. We'll drive on Central Avenue sometimes and you wouldn't even run by mistake into a bank, except maybe ATMs. And so, and then you have payday loans, right? In all these other places, and you have dollar stores, and you know, I thought that we need to have a plan that would change that. And so we came up with a comprehensive plan that we said over the next 20 years, we need to change the trajectory of our city. But unfortunately, though, the plan became something where the tail was wagging the dog. People focus so much on that number 2 goal, which is creating neighborhood diversity. You know, the word diversity triggers some people. And so what we meant by that was this. 84% of Charlotte's land area was exclusively dedicated to single-family housing, which meant you couldn't build townhomes, you couldn't build duplexes and triplexes there. As a matter of fact, we calculated it, and we found that between 1951 and the time the plan was adopted, we had built less than 100 plex units in the entire city. Why? Because the places where you could build them were few. They were on corner lots. And so what I wanted us to do was, let's turn this thing around. Let's figure out how we can build more plex units, because we also found that most Americans, as we're growing into the future, by 2030, 2035, most Americans wanted smaller footprints of homes. Because as we age, we get tired of mowing our lawns. And so people wanted to stop living in 1,500 square foot homes and wanted to live in 750 square foot homes. And we thought that smaller units will meet our needs for the future, so we can avoid a lot of foreclosures and people having to not be able to pay for large single family units. So again, people forgot all of those nuances. And so the plan was so important that we wanted not only to people to have opportunity to live in housing of their choice, but also to have ways by which they could get there quickly. Hence the idea behind 10-minute neighborhoods. Why should you have to drive 5 miles to buy a gallon of milk? Or why do you have to go 15 minutes to find a soccer pitch for your kid to practice? And so those things were very important. They became controversial, but the fact of the matter was that we kept moving forward because we felt that before we launched into those goals, we had already connected with residents who wanted us to do these things. In Greensboro, on the other hand, it wasn't housing that drove the plan. It was mobility. And so what you see on the far, the teal color that says becoming a car optional city, that's what was driving Greensboro's plan. There was really hardly any controversy about Greensboro's plan because they had a tradition of developing long-range plans than Charlotte did. The larger your city and the more complex your city, the less the interest in developing a citywide plan. That's why New York is the only city in this country, the largest, that has no citywide plan. Everything is based on the boroughs because New York is just very large. But the fact is that we're not New York. And so we still have a manageable enough population that we can have a plan for. Greensboro is about 300 and so thousand people, but downtown Greensboro has about 36% of its land area dedicated to surface parking. There are more people who park their cars in downtown Greensboro than people living in downtown Greensboro. I'm kidding you not. Downtown Greensboro has roughly about 3,000 residents, but has about 9,000 parking spaces. Just think about that. So that's why becoming car optional was a major drive of their own 20-year plan. They were smart enough, unlike me, to not talk a lot about housing diversity in every neighborhood in Greensboro because they did not want their plan to be messed up, like we experienced a little bit here in Charlotte. But at the end of the day, by vote of 6-5, council passed that. And I'm always saying to people, democracy is 51% of the vote. You know, right? If it's over 51%, then we're good. If it's at 50%, you have to go back again. And so again, I felt that all these plans are consistent with what the North Carolina League of Municipalities survey identified, that 80% of North Carolina residents believe in walkable neighborhoods. They believe that neighborhoods should have trails and parks, while another 93% believe we should preserve our trees and we should preserve our open places. In other words, how close people live to amenities often influence where they live. If COVID taught us anything, it taught us that people want to get out. You may want to work from home, but you're not going to stay cooped in your house all day. In fact, during COVID, I met a lot of neighbors that I'd never met since I've been living in my neighborhood because they came out, walking their dogs, doing business. COVID had turned the whole thing about rush hour into, totally on its head. A study was done in Wisconsin that shows that rush hour is now between 9 and 5. See, because some of people who work at home, this time they choose to go for lunch varies now. And there are people who don't go to the office or who don't go out to the doctor. So people who work from home still goes to the doctor. They still go to dentists. And sometimes they choose to go at 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. Or they choose to go at 2 p.m. So there's no more rush hour that's between 6 and 9 or between 3 and 6 p.m. It's now all around because people work from home. But what we found is that people who work from home also want to get out. They want to walk. They want to push the stroller with their baby in it. They want to walk the dog. So amenities are now defining where people choose to live. I believe that we're going to continue to see that as we grow into the future. As a wrap-up, what are the parameters that we need to frame cities of the future? As an organization, you understand 3 things very important to project management. What are those 3 things? Schedule, budget, scope. It's very important. And so I believe that these are the things that should be in the scope of a livable city. If a city, in my mind, is not proximate, if people are not proximate to amenities and facilities, their quality of life goes down. Housing, in my mind, is only affordable if it's close to something that the people who live in there want. What's the point of finding affordable housing 30 miles out of town because it's cheap, but it's far from the doctor, it's far from emergency services, it's far from police services, it becomes very expensive. I remember we lived in a place one time where the Chick-fil-A that my daughter wanted to walk in, you could see it from my house, but you couldn't get there because there's no way to walk to this Chick-fil-A. So thank goodness for Uber and Lyft. They finally came along and were able to spend most of the income she made from Chick-fil-A on Uber and Lyft. But the fact of the matter is that if it's not proximate, it becomes even more expensive. Quality of life should be defined by proximity to things that people want and the way they do. Secondly, accessibility and mobility will be very important. A good mobility system will both serve and shape our cities as we grow and develop. I always believe transit is not only city serving, it's also city shaping. You can shape your entire city by the way you plan your mobility system. I just told you I was in Dubai for 10 days. I used the transit system. See, the first time I was in Dubai was in the 90s, or about 2000. I helped to plan their early transit system, but I didn't recognize anything when I went this time around. Buildings had popped up all around the transit stations because they wanted people who had no access to vehicles to also have a place where they should be able to get on and go do what they need to do. So accessibility is important. A good mobility system. Transit for a lot of people is lifeline. Without it, they can go nowhere. But for some of us, it's a lifestyle. I have 2 cars at home, right? But I still want to use transit. But transit and mobility has to meet both needs. There are those who would choose never to drive. Charlotte has over 250,000 people who do not drive. Think about that. 250,000 people who do not drive, and so it's important that we provide them options. Number three is a diverse and resilient economy is important to the vitality of our city. Small, locally grown businesses should thrive, while our underserved residents should not be at the receiving end of the impact of us attracting large businesses. And as I mentioned before, people want vibrant, active, open spaces where kids can play, where the public can gather. Open spaces are like healthy cells in a body. For a city to be sustainable, we have to preserve trees. We have to create plazas. We have to design buildings so people can allow for these things. And finally, a livable city should strive to have multiple types of housing and various price points for its residents. Why? Because people should be able to age in place and stay in place. What works today for a 45-year-old, when you become 80, you don't need to have to move out of your neighborhood. You don't have to go move away from your doctor simply because you aged. So if housing diversity is in your neighborhood, you can move from a single family home to a townhouse or to a plex unit. Every neighborhood should have that ability. In conclusion, like you, I have managed multiple complex projects and controversial projects. I understand the challenges of balancing project scope, of balancing budget, of trying to explain to your client why you're not keeping up with schedule. But I also understand that behind every project, behind every dollar that we spend, behind every line on a schedule is a human being. People matter. To me, that's really what drives what we do every single day. Cities are about people, not about the numbers. So my charge to all of us today at PMI, my charge to you as an organization, is to champion these ideals of livability. Let's build cities. Let's work on projects that are sustainable, that are equitable, that will make cities livable. If we turn these ideals into realities, we make people's lives better. Quality of life will go up. My profession, our profession, count on you to do this as we frame our future cities together. So thank you once again for inviting me. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm sure there will be one or two people who want to ask me some controversial questions, but that's why Latoya is here. She can answer those, but before you come up, if there's any one or two questions, I'll be happy to answer, but thank you. Yes, sir.
You mentioned Greensboro. I was just curious, other differences you may have noticed between Charlotte and Greensboro since they're so close.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned Greensboro had history of some. Can you repeat your question? Oh, I was going to ask just a little bit more insight. I'm curious of differences that you've noticed
Yes.
between Charlotte and Greensboro. You mentioned that Greensboro had more planning in their background, and I was just curious, any other observations?
Somehow, the leaders of North Carolina some years ago, I think back in the 50s, had a lot of hopes in Greensboro because it was centrally located. So for some reason, they put a lot of investment in transportation, highways. As you drive through Greensboro, you see this network of highways. So any resident of Greensboro can get anywhere within 15 to 20 minutes without traffic. That's a major gain for Greensboro, but that's only if you drive. If you do not drive, Charlotte is a better option because your buses move on time, even though you criticize it all the time. It's better than what we have. The average time between buses in Greensboro is between 30 and 60 minutes to wait for a bus. We have only one bus line that runs every 15 minutes. As a matter of fact, there's a running joke in my house. If I leave my house to come to Charlotte, I get to Charlotte before I leave my house to get to work if I'm taking the bus in Greensboro. That's really, really important. But the quality of life, I go home for lunch in Greensboro. Think about that. I could never attempt that in Charlotte. You know, I mean, the quality of life, if it's defined by how quickly you can move around by driving, is awesome. Greensboro also has a lot of tree canopy. The city is green. And it's probably one of the few cities in the country that has 4 natural lakes within the city boundary. And that's nothing to sneeze at because that could mitigate environmental issues in the future. And so as we build in Greensboro, the fact that you have those water bodies can actually help to create a more clean air and clean environment. Charlotte doesn't really have, you have Catawba Lake, but it's kind of like over there. And then you have the other one by the government center. I think that Charlotte, as a growing city, when we ask young people in Greensboro, where do they want to go after they leave, they mention 4 cities: Charlotte, Raleigh, Atlanta, and Washington, D.C. Breaks my heart, as a city manager. And so our job is to try to find a way to keep them. So Charlotte has a lot of great advantages. I'm always saying that the success of Charlotte is important for us, because if Charlotte sets an example and it works, then Greensboro can point to it and say, if Charlotte did that, we can do it too. And of course, the cost of living. You can still find homes in Greensboro for less than $100,000. You can still find homes to buy for less than $150,000. I don't think you will find maybe a doghouse in Charlotte to buy for less. So that's one. I know you also have another question, and it's 11, but let's take that, and then I'll turn it over. Thank you.
Thank you. As someone who has benefited from your time here in Charlotte, when I moved here, it was 2014 and needed to get a residence in town to walk to my IT project management position. And so I got an apartment off of Graham Street. Condo popped open across from Fourth Ward Park, so I bought that. I say the county does my landscaping. I took a Lime scooter up here this morning. I walk to work every day. I, barely spend $100 on gas in a month. The 2040 plan is the basic premise of my question. How much did you have input to that? And now that they're trying to execute it, especially the North Tryon portion of that, what do you foresee for Charlotte in the next decade? Thank you.
Thank you. The 2040, that was the premise behind the 2040 plan. Every resident should be able to get to where they need to go without having to drive. And if you choose to drive, do it smartly. I don't believe as much that autonomous vehicles will necessarily reduce traffic in the future. I don't believe so. But I believe that people will still drive. And if you're going to do it, can we create that opportunity where you drive smartly without making negative contributions to the air quality? And so people should be able to walk. If you use transit and you bike, you should be able to safely put your bicycle on a bus or on a train. If you want to get out and exercise and have life, you should be able to do that. You go to downtown Durham right now, 300 people have yoga in the middle of the day in a public plaza in downtown Durham. That's huge. People should be able to find cities when they can actually do that. That was the premise behind the 2040 plan. Again, we know it will take a while to get there. We created the whole notion around 10-minute neighborhoods because we believe that you should be able to have access to everything that makes for life or for living within a 10-minute walk. The challenge you all have is that there are some people right now who are trying to change that 6-5 vote and really defeat the whole notion of that comprehensive plan. But the fact of the matter is that we can't stop growth. And as we grow, if we want to grow smartly, if we want people to have a good way of life, this is the place to be. Young people are driving less and less. They want more options. And if you want young people to stay in our city, we better offer those options to them, or they will vote with their feet. And I think that Charlotte is in a great place to do that. I believe that in the future, if we want the plan to succeed, then we need to move towards getting a regional transit system. So that whether I live in Union or Gaston or Carbaros, I want to come here, not just to watch the Panthers play, but to come uptown Charlotte or to visit my family in Charlotte. I should be able to do it without having to drive. And that plan is expensive, it's costly. I worked on it, it's almost $14 billion. Unfortunately, when you all are voting on it, I will be somewhere else. But I think it would be great for this city if you can create a transit authority that will allow that plan to come to fruition. Thank you so much once again for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Taiwo, for coming and sharing your wisdom. I encourage, I know drop in his DMs, as we say. And
And I will hang out here for another hour or so. So I'll share, I'll participate. So if anyone wants to talk one-on-one, that's good
here's
too.
a token of our appreciation.
Oh, wow, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Wow, I appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to move to the next slide right quick. So we want to thank our sponsors right quick. They are here. If you're in the room, please stand. So Wake Forest University is our venue sponsor. Thank you very much, Wake Forest University. Maven Dog, they're here. Give them a round of applause. Sherpa. IOL is not here, but Ansley is here, I believe, and they're our closing keynote sponsors. So if they're not here, they'll be here later. So thank you very much. And then this is the session survey. This is how you will be able to receive your PDU credit. So if you have a PMP or if you have some type of Agile certification, so those are called CECs, Continuing Education Credits, you can get credit, well, through PMI, you can do it this way. If you need to get a CEC, you still can claim it, but you have to claim it on your own. I'm pretty sure since the pandemic and going to restaurants, you all are pretty familiar with using barcodes. While you're scanning that and doing the quick survey and getting credit for your PDUs, I'll give you some quick information about our schedule. So we're just a few minutes over on our schedule, but this is our official break time. So I do encourage you all to go out to the lobby and take advantage of the muffins, parfaits, fresh coffee, juice, and refreshments that are out there. There are bathrooms throughout the facility that you can use. Additionally, this is the room where the power skills sessions will be. And then ways of working will be in room 123, which is in the back. And next to that lecture room is 124, and that's where, remind me, Rhonda, the other name? Business Acumen, sorry. Business Acumen, that'll be there. Does anyone else need the barcode? You got it? Okay. While you get up to go to it, I'll just show you right quick what's going to be next. So our next sessions, here they are. I'm going to go back for him in just a moment. Our next sessions are right here. So we have ways of working, power skills, and business acumen. So John Utley, Stephen Brown, and Stacy Cassio are our great presenters. We definitely encourage you to listen to their case studies, and we appreciate you very much.
You might want to mention that if you don't know your number, it's on the back of your name tag.
Oh, yes. If you don't know your membership number, it's on the back of your name tag. So not your PMP or PMI ACP or credential number, but it's your actual membership number. All right.
Do we have a contest for the lowest number?
I know mine isn't the lowest.
Now I'm curious, what is yours?
Yeah, what does yours start with?
Is yours got 5 digits or 4?
308, no, it's 6. 308. That's 308.
Wow. I knew mine by heart, but I can't remember it now. Okay. All right, thank you, everyone. And once you do your survey, this is just another code for a special guest pass offer for our PDD guests so that you can attend a chapter meeting, and it's good for free, and it's good for 1 year. Thank you very much.